Welcome to the director's commentary of The Lonely Poppy. So I began this project by initially researching my ancillary tasks. I decided to look for existing examples of film posters and also film reviews, as I felt that this would give me a good understanding of the forms and conventions of these media products. I found it relatively easy researching these two tasks, as there's obviously quite a lot of availability on the internet. I found that there were certain things I needed to include on the poster, things such as obviously the name of the director and the names of the lead actors, but things that I wasn't quite so familiar with were details such as the billing card, which needed to include information like the name of the production company and a classification for the film. I met all of the conventions that I found during my research, as I felt that in doing so I would ensure that my poster would meet industry standards and so therefore successfully promote my short film. I eventually decided upon placing my review as if it would be in a Sight and Sound magazine, as I felt that the kind of target audience that this magazine intends to reach out to would be more media literate than, say, that of Empire magazine. So the first thing that I looked at with the review was the style of language. I found that in the Sight and Sound magazine the language was very analytical and very formal. I also found that the title of the review would not be the name of the film, it would actually be a statement about the film, whether this be kind of a witty statement or simply just stating the basics of the opinion that the reviewer held. And this was something that I definitely tried to incorporate in my own film review, and I feel that I did this quite successfully. The beginning of the review also held a brief synopsis of the film. I also found that in quite a few of the reviews that I read from Sight and Sound magazine, there was a rhetorical question at the end of the review, and again this is a convention that I tried to meet when writing my own review. So when beginning my research for The Lonely Poppy, I looked for existing examples of short films, and I split this into two categories, one being animation and one being narrative. I turned to YouTube to look for examples. So in terms of animation, I was inspired by a music video called Her Morning Elegance, a stop motion made entirely out of post-it notes called Deadline, and also a stop motion called Muto, which was created by a group of graphic artists and featured wall paintings. I found that in terms of conventions for stop motion animation, generally it's regarded that 6 to 30 frames per second is the range that people work within. The higher amount of frames that people work with, the smoother the persistence of vision becomes. I worked with really the most basic form of the technique, probably using around 6 frames per second, and I found this in itself quite challenging and obviously quite time consuming as well. So then back to narrative. I found a short film on YouTube called Eyelids, which was based on a children's book, and so this led me to thinking about whether I would like to base my short film upon a children's book. I looked at a couple of books that I had remembered from my childhood, and I discussed this idea on my blog quite extensively. So next I turned to CBeebies, as I felt that this would give me the opportunity to again look for existing examples of children's productions. The main ones that I focused upon were Charlie and Lola, In the Night Garden, and also The Green Balloon Club. The Green Balloon Club really caught my attention, as it was based entirely around nature, and so led me to think that maybe I would like to base my own short film around nature. The main conventions of production shown on CBeebies were that generally the titles were quite generic, and obviously this style of title is very simple and very memorable to a very young audience. Again, the narrative of many of the productions were very, very simple and also quite generic, in that they all contain some form of conflict, but this conflict was always resolved within the programme and didn't ever lead on to the next programme. In this sense, I followed this convention. I felt that each episode or programme on CBeebies could actually be seen as a short film in themselves, as they featured around the similar duration as to what I was intending to create. And in terms of narrative, as mentioned, any conflict was resolved within the episode. This style of closed narrative meant that it didn't rely upon prior knowledge of the characters in the programme. I met this convention as obviously with a short film there is not an episode prior to this and there will not be an episode after Lonely Poppy, and so all of the introduction to my characters and the development of plot is contained within the 5 minutes of my short film. The next key bit in my research was the discovery of Oliver Postgate. I discovered Postgate as I decided to look at older examples of children's programmes for inspiration, as I felt I would quite like to broaden my research. I looked at a lot of Oliver Postgate's work, ranging from his really early productions such as The Pingwings, The Puggles, to his more famous productions including Noggin the Nog, The Clangers and also Bagpuss. The main conventions of Postgate's work that I picked up on were in some way similar to CBeebies and in some way completely different. They worked with quite a basic storyline, again because they're aimed at attracting a similar demographic, and as with the CBeebies productions, any conflict was resolved within the episode, it never spilled over. I also found that Oliver Postgate voiced all of his characters and also was the voiceover in many of his productions, and this was a convention that I really wanted to be able to adhere to. I initially wanted a male to be the voiceover and also the voice of all the characters in my short film, but decided against this as when looking at Charlie and Lola, I found that they used children's voices in their productions, and I wanted to meet this convention by including a child's voice in my own production. And so I combined aspects from Oliver Postgate's work and also from modern examples in my own short film, and I feel that this was a really successful aspect of my production. Another thing that I noticed was the haunting music of Postgate's work. I found that the music on CBeebies productions were generally quite generic, and I wanted to move away from this. The music allowed me to create a sense of obscurity. My animation was based in a cardboard box, and I laid felt all on the inside of the box, so to create quite a dark atmosphere. I also used low lighting and worked with several high angle shots to create this sense of obscurity and a slightly sinister atmosphere that is also often present in Postgate's work. In my short film, I feel that I've subverted many of the generic conventions of CBeebies, however I've also adhered to some of them as well in order to make sure that my short film was suitable for my audience.